the Tectonic Takes podcast. I'm your usual host, Ivan Ornelas, here with one of our other co-hosts from Tectonic Takes, as well as a guest from the Soccer Talk Lads podcast. We have Abel Anguiano and Justin Horneker. Abel, how are you doing?
Doing pretty good, Ivan. Thank you for asking.
Good. Thank you for joining us, Abel. And we're especially excited to have you here, Justin. I enjoyed listening to your podcast, even though I'm 2 time zones away. I'm eagerly excited to see what St. Louis can do when they're finally getting an MLS club. But in the meantime, you guys have been doing a great job covering a lot of things from the world of soccer as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We try to kind of cover everything from the lens of, St. Louis soccer. We like to be pretty high and mighty about ourselves in that way. But appreciate you listening to a podcast for a team that is still a year and a half away from competing. So,
yeah, for me, my soccer podcast consumption is a little bit all over the map. If I enjoy the podcasters, they could be talking about the third tier of the Egyptian league, and I'll enjoy it. So. Well, anyway, one thing we all have in common is we spend a lot of time throughout this international break watching World Cup qualifiers. Justin definitely followed USA. Abel paid a little bit more attention to Mexico, and I was somewhere in the middle. So we are going to focus mostly on the USA and Mexico, as USA followed by Mexico. Most of our listeners are interested in those nations. And then we will mention some of the other results around CONCACAF too as we're going through those match days. And then at the end, we'll talk about all the other regions as well. And we'll start to see that the World Cup qualifying campaign is reaching these final stages with just over a year to go for the World Cup in Qatar. That's where we're at. We're starting to weed out some of the teams that are there to make up the numbers. And then we're getting down to some interesting battles across the world. So without further ado, we do want to mention one serious note because this is our first podcast since the NWSL news broke out. And we recently collaborated with the Soccer Crush podcast. Those women, Abby, Trish, and Beth, they do a great job covering Cincinnati sports as well. And they've been so kind in helping Tectonic Takes and myself get the ropes of podcasting. So when the news broke out, I immediately talked to them and checked in with them and how they were feeling. For those of you who did miss out on what happened, the NWSL had some news break out concerning harassment issues and allegations against former North Carolina Courage head coach Paul Riley. And for more information, you can listen to the Soccer Talk Lads podcast where they interviewed Sydney Lara from the Blue Testament. But very briefly, Justin, what were your thoughts on that, since I know you spoke about that on the podcast?
Yeah, it's a tough subject to kind of elaborate on as far as like feelings, right? Because it is very emotional, it's very raw, especially for any of your listeners that have been following women's soccer and NWSL for a while, because Paul Riley was a very accomplished women's coach, a very celebrated women's coach, and then now you kind of have these memories that are all tainted and it all feels a little raw. We've had a little bit of time to, adjust to that since the news came out, but you can see kind of with the reaction within NWSL and even within, World Women's Soccer, if you watched any of the UEFA, I guess it's not UEFA, whatever the, Women's Champions League, as well as the Women's Super League games, they all had a kind of get together during the game as well to kind of show their support for the NWSL players. So it's something that has impacted, all of the players, because it's very much a systemic issue. It's not just a Paul Riley issue. It's something that happens in women's sports, from the college ranks to the professional ranks, in every profession. You see it. You saw it with gymnastics a few years back with Larry Nassar and all the fallout that could eventually lead to U.S. gymnastics just not being a thing anymore. So it's very raw and it's very tough subject to really sink your teeth into, but it's something that you should definitely be familiar with.
Right. Abel, were you aware of this situation?
I was aware of it. I think the day after everything kind of happened, like my Twitter was like filled with the news. And I was just thinking to myself, like, people never listen about the NWSL. And I'm like, this is the first thing that's like come up to them.
Yeah.
So it just paints like a really bad picture on women's sports in general. But I think like the big issue obviously here is that this is like a very recurring issue. You see it with like every sport on all of the ranks, like you guys mentioned. And people are very quick to say that, oh, like they're just allegations. You know, this could easily be proven false. But I'm like, okay, but how many allegations is it going to take for people to like wake up and say, okay, you know what, like this might be an actual problem that's happening, not just like women all over the country making stuff up about these guys that are harassing them. So people for sure they need to start paying more attention to this. Um, Definitely listen to the players. I think we need to stand in solidarity with them. But yeah, like Justin said, it's a very tough issue, but it's a very serious one.
Right. And it's one that does need to be talked about. And I hope that the reaction that people who don't watch women's soccer, even during the Women's World Cup or exclusively during the Women's World Cup, will acknowledge that NWSL is still a league that is worth supporting, because this is a chance for women from the United States and across the world to get regular game time. If there's still a lot of countries that compete in the Women's World Cup who they don't have a strong domestic league, or they play very infrequently, or their international fixtures are very infrequent. So it is
Yeah,
an
and
essential part of growing the sport. Sorry,
for
Justin.
sure. And yeah, the NWSL, for all of its warts, is still like the most competitive women's league in the world. Like even
Yes.
the European teams outside Champions League, and even then it's 4 or 5 teams that are really
Mhm.
strong, and every team in NWSL is really strong. So it's a fun league to watch. It's a fun league to kind of, if you like chaotic soccer, which your Quakes friends probably do, it's very
Yes.
fun.
Oh yeah, we are definitely familiar with that, and we do also have to give NWSL a lot of credit. With they were the first professional league within North America to restart after the pandemic, so there are a lot of things that they are doing right. So continue to support women's soccer. Many of the members of our community in San Jose Earthquakes and in Tectonic Takes, whether they're interacting on social media or competing in a fantasy league or all sorts of things, like there's a lot of great women out there that are supporting San Jose Earthquake soccer. So we should be doing the same to support NWSL, and that's what
Exactly.
we will be doing forward, as I have continued and all of us here have. And one last note before we get into the squads. Recently, San Jose Earthquakes did have a friendly match against Cruz Azul over the international break that fortunately went pretty badly. There were some fans that behaved poorly. There was a pitch invader. There was some physical violence. There were some hospitalizations. Thankfully, no serious injuries or deaths. But unfortunately, this just made a stressful friendly because of the way it was scheduled and at the time it was scheduled. It made it a very unfortunate night, and no one should have to go to a soccer match worried for their safety or their children's safety. So hopefully this doesn't become the norm, doesn't continue to happen. I know there have been some incidents in the past with Liga MX teams, but remember that there are still a lot of well-behaved Cruz Azul fans, and still a lot of well-behaved Hispanic, Mexican, Latinx supporters that attend San Jose Earthquakes games and are a huge part of our community. So we'll move forward stronger, and we're glad no one got hurt. And from that note, we will get into the USA squad. So, in the goalkeepers, we called up Matt Turner, Sean Johnson, and Zach Steffen. Defenders were Serginho Dest, Walker Zimmerman, Anthony Robinson, Miles Robinson, Chris Richards, Mark McKenzie, George Bello, Shaq Moore, and DeAndre Yedlin. For the midfielders, we had Tyler Adams, Yunus Musa, Weston McKinney, Christian Roldan, Luca De La Torre, Sebastian Leggett, Kellen Acosta, and Gianluca Busio. With the forwards, Paul Ariola, Jesse Zardes, Brendan Aronson, Ricardo Pepe, Matthew Hoppy, and Timothy Weah. So when this roster was released, Justin, what was your initial reaction?
Yeah, I mean, I was okay with it. There's a lot. I have a lot of kind of retrospect after
Mhm.
the Panama game with kind of what this roster maybe should have looked like. But for me, the only real snubs where I would have definitely brought Joe Scally. I understand that he's kind of just broken through the last 2 months or so, so maybe you're still worried about his play time. You're worried about him handling the travel with those CONCACAF games, and Berhalter said experience, but this team is not experienced anyway, so that's kind of a BS excuse on my end. But that was kind of the only snub as far as I saw. Goalkeepers, that's always solid. I was okay with Sean Johnson. If we had to rely on Sean Johnson, things have gone terribly wrong anyway. But outside of that, yeah, I thought it was a decent enough roster.
Yeah, so among the notable omissions I had, you could have maybe put in Ethan Horvath in that third spot instead of Sean Johnson, but he's still trying to win that job at Nottingham Forest, that starting role, which is a reminder for if there is any U.S. men's national team hopefuls listening to this podcast, be very careful making a move just before the World Cup, because you never know if you're going to be a starter or not, and if you're not playing regularly ahead of a World Cup, it's going to make your chances of getting into that roster smaller. And if you do get on the roster, you won't be in as fit of a form as your country would want you to be. Other notable omissions, John Brooks was injured. There's no Reggie Cannon. You mentioned Joe Scally. It's honorable to us because he's an Earthquakes player. Jackson Newell wasn't on this roster. Maybe for the best because, we need him for the San Jose Earthquakes, and he does need to improve a little bit. Christian Pulisic and Gio Reyna were also injured. There's no Josh Sargent, and this is a bit controversial because we learned after the fact that it wasn't this decision for Fark to keep him fit. It was a decision for USA essentially preferring a more domestic option to deal with the CONCACAF travel. But at the same time, you see all these other European-based players like Josh Sargent over maybe a Giassi Zardes would be the move, in my opinion. But this is Greg Berhalter. He has coached Giassi Zardes. We understand his biases there. And the other player other than Daryl DK that could have potentially been on this roster, I think, Jordan Pifak Sibachu, who scored a Champions League goal against Manchester United. That could have been useful to have in the squad. And one person that I didn't list was Julian Green. I had a friend on Twitter. He explained to me why Julian Green should have been on this roster with his exploits at Greuther Fürth in the last season and this current Bundesliga season. But it's nice to be spoiled for choice.
Yeah, I think PFOC for me is maybe the other snub that I would have wanted there. I think Sargent still has some proving to do. I'm a big Josh Sargent trooper. He's an STL boy, I understand, but he hasn't looked great on the international level and has not necessarily won, that much more starting time at Norwich. So he needs to stay there and kind of get his reps in. So I was okay with that. PFOC scoring a Champions League goal, you would have thought that'd be enough to get you on the roster, but striker wasn't our issue either, so it's just.
Abel, did you have any thoughts on this roster?
Seems very MLS heavy, and I think you and I talked about this on a previous podcast where we talked about having a lot of MLS players on your team can be very bittersweet because on one hand you're really developing the league, but you're also kind of wasting the potential of a lot of players who are European bound. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And this is a challenge unique to USA in terms of the relevant soccer nations. Maybe to a lesser extent, a country like Australia might also consider this as well. But for the most part, the Netherlands national team, they don't care about developing Eredivisie and calling up their domestic players. Argentina could care less about calling up more Liga Argentina players or Primera División. I forget the name, but anyway, Argentina's domestic league more than they have to when you've got a bunch of players playing in Europe. So for the roster breakdown, you have 11 players called up from MLS, which raises alarm bells for some fans, but the devil's advocate in me thinks, well, there were 10 MLS players in the 2014 World Cup squad that did pretty well in challenging circumstances with a difficult group and then facing Belgium the next round. But when you look at the other European call-ups, the most represented league is 3 players from La Liga. You have a 4th Spanish-based player in Shaq Moore who plays in the 2nd tier. And then you have a mix of players scattered around Europe from Bundesliga, both German and Austrian. One from the Premier League, one from the Championship, and so on and so forth. So I think maybe 10 years from now, we have a US, say, roster that can qualify for a World Cup, and then it's maybe 2 MLS players or something like that. But for now, like MLS is something that we do have to rely on to a certain extent. The question is whether Greg Berhalter understands what that extent should be.
Yeah, and like in my mind, that made sense because of the Panama game, knowing that like England-based players weren't going to be able to travel there, and it might be tough for some of the other European-based players. So like that's how I justified it initially, but seeing that rotation in action, it definitely changed my mind a bit,
Yeah.
which we'll get to.
All right. So now let's talk a little bit about Mexico. Their squad consists of their following goalkeepers: Rodolfo Cota, Guillermo Ochoa, Jonathan Orozco, and Alfredo Talavera. Their defenders were Nestor Araujo, Julio Dominguez, Jesus Gallardo, Cesar Montes, Hector Moreno, Chaco Rodriguez, Osvaldo Rodriguez, Jorge Sanchez, and Johan Vasquez. The midfielders were Edson Alvarez, Uriel Antuna, Sebastian Cordova, Jonathan Dos Santos, Andres Guardado, Hector Herrera, also known as HH, Orbelin Pineda, Luis Romo, Charlie Rodriguez, Tecatito Corona in the forwards, starting us off with Rogelio Funes Mori, Raul Jimenez, Chucky Irving Lozano, Henry Martin, and Alexis Vega. And yes, we love our nicknames here in Mexico. Abel, what did you think of this roster?
So when I was looking at the roster, my eyes immediately went to Nestor Araujo, because that kind of like told me that, okay, we're going with another squad in which we're not trusting the youth again. And then I started looking at the keepers. Okay, I mean, the keepers, we don't really have that many choices as well, but it became very apparent in the first game when Johan Vasquez wasn't even on the bench. We just saw like a lot of experienced players, and on one hand, it's good because experience matters a lot in the game, but I feel like a lot of these players, they're just like not at the level necessary to compete for World Cup qualifiers anymore. I guess we can go into that a little more like once we actually go into the actual game breakdowns.
Yeah.
But looking here at the squad breakdowns, you see that you have like 19 Liga MX players. Part of that is because we don't have that many choices like USA, that we have like a ton of players in Europe.
Right.
I mean, there are still a bunch of players that I feel like could have been considered from other leagues. We do have some Mexicans in other European leagues. They're very young, but they could have still been taken into consideration.
Right.
Liga MX, Premier League. No more than 10 players from Europe, and it's kind of concerning when you look at it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
So I'll. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just gonna say again. And I think we have to start looking at other options.
All right, and you could probably provide some of those other options as well. In looking at the Liga MX players that were called up, or Liga MX, there are 8 clubs represented: Monterrey, America, Cruz Azul, Chivas, León, Pumas, Santos, and Tigres. The first 5 of those had 2 or more called up from their team, and none were called up from second place Atlas or third place Toluca. So I do think that there might be a little bit of a big team bias with the selection of players for the Mexico national team. And we see this happen with England, right, Justin, where if a player is doing okay, but he plays for Arsenal or Manchester United, you might get a bit more of a leeway. Whereas, you have to really be busting your ass if you're Declan Rice in West Ham or Calvin Phillips in Leeds United to get on that roster. So similar trend here in Mexico.
Does Tata have like a favorite kind of bench player that he relies on way too hardly, kind of like we do here in the MLS or here in the US?
I mean, he does a lot of rotation, so it's kind of hard to like pinpoint like one player that he really relies on. I think like one player that he can definitely count on, at least in the Mexican squad, is like Uriel Antuna, because every time that he's in the Mexican squad, he performs like it's the it's gonna be the last game of his life. You know, he never performs like this in Chivas, so he likes to use him a lot.
Yeah, I'm
Rises
also
to
a
the
Chivas
occasion.
fan, so that was definitely something that hit home for me there. Notable missions from Mexico include Alberto Sepulveda, Carlos Salcedo, Rodolfo Pizarro, Roberto Alvarado, Eric Gutierrez, Diego Lainez, JJ Macias, or JJ, and Chicharito, of course. But some of these players, I might be stretching out notable omissions a little bit thin, because I think for someone like Chicharito, I think it's clear that Mexico doesn't necessarily have him in their plans for the next World Cup. It's kind of like they've drawn that conclusion with Landon Donovan in the 2014 World Cup, except much more in advance.
Yeah.
And actually scoring still.
Yeah, that is very true. Diego Lainez is definitely, of all the players, I feel like he would have been the most helpful to have in the squad if he wasn't still hurt from the Olympics, I think, right, Abel?
Yeah. If I had to choose like two players from this squad, it would be um, Gilberto Sepúlveda and Diego Lainez. Gilberto Sepúlveda because our defense really needs young blood, and Diego Lainez, I think he has a lot of potential.
How
Yeah,
far away is a player like Eric Gutierrez at PSV?
Uh,
I think there was a point, I haven't followed PSV too much, but there was a point where Eric Gutierrez felt like he was going to be a nailed on starter for Mexico as a defensive midfielder. But even though they still play in a 4-3-3, which could have a holding midfielder, they seemed content to, give appearances, whether it be starts or mostly off the bench recently, to someone like Andres Guardado, who this surely would be his last World Cup, but some would argue that 2018 should have been.
Got it.
Yeah, so Eric Gutierrez remains a mystery. He has had some good performances for Mexico in recent memory, but hasn't been out of this world to the point where he was not selected in this round of fixtures. Prior to the break, oh, sorry, Bo.
If I'm not mistaken, he's also been linked to move back to Liga MX,
which is another troubling concern. And it's similar to what USA dealt with Michael Bradley and Josie Altidore and them, where if they're not cutting it in Europe, especially before World Cup year, they think, okay, the safest bet for me to get considerable playing time is going back to my domestic league, which could be true, but at the same time, you do want to be able to hope that your players can fight it out and stick around in Europe. Because when you look at, the groups that you're going to be drawn with, even the second tier European teams, such as Switzerland, for example, you look at their roster, their team players play for a lot of Europa League at least level clubs. So it's something that could put Mexico in a bit of a hole there. But for now, you got to work with what you have. And going into this break, Mexico was on top with 7 points. Canada and USA were tied with Panama on 4 points, but Canada and USA held down second and third, with Costa Rica, Honduras, and El Salvador all with 2 points, and Jamaica with a lone point. The big question in this window was, will the gap between the top four increase over the bottom four? And could USA and Mexico maintain their status as the two superpowers, as well as keeping an eye on Canada, trying to close in on them? And going into this window, I think both Mexico and USA, the goal would have been minimum 7 points. Agreed?
Yeah, I would say so. I was hoping for 9. I thought I'd be happy with 7.
Yeah. So we'll start with USA versus Jamaica. This was held in Austin. USA went with a pretty strong lineup for this. No real complaints with Turner, Dest, Zimmerman, Robinson, both of them in their back four, with Adams, McKinney, and Musa in that midfield three, Ariola, Pepe, and Aronson. I guess Ariola, people always complain about him, but him and Zimmerman were the main question marks there. but not even the biggest question mark in that game. Justin, what do you think of the "We Are the U.S. Mighty Mighty U.S." chant?
Yeah, I mean, some of our chanting could be updated for 2021. I think we're
Yeah,
still
this
using
would have
the
been
"We
cool.
Believe" chant as well.
This would have been the Tony the Tiger chants. Like that would have been great like 15 years ago, but the moment has long since
You
passed.
gotta evolve. You gotta evolve.
Yeah.
Yeah, the "I believe that we will win" chant I think is still timeless enough, but still. The big moment in that game was Kamar Lawrence getting away with a red card in the early minutes. Jamaica would have another no call in their favor as well, and definitely an early CONCACAF going on in that game, right?
Yeah, and I think like that. If you look at our kind of lack of offense, so to speak, in the first half, I mean, we should have had at least a red card early on that would have changed that a lot too. So you kind of have to like frame that a little bit also.
Yeah, and for the Aronson challenge, low committed foul 6 minutes after appearing to get injured, but it appeared to be a denial of goal scoring opportunity for Aronson. So, did you see it that way?
Yeah, I thought so. Clear. I thought both of them were like clearly being pulled down when they're in on goal. So
Right, and something that I have noticed with the San Jose Earthquakes is that if they're on top in the first half and things don't go their way, like for whatever reason they don't get that goal, it usually comes back to bite them immediately in the second half. And USA have been prone to this a couple of times as well, but instead they kept up the intensity. And who else but Ricardo Pepi? He was the man on form for this early part of the window. He got his brace. How exciting is Pepi?
yeah, I mean, we've needed a player like him since peak Josie, really.
Right. He's the most natural number 9 we have right now. It's like,
yeah, I think he has an eye for goal. So like he's still not there technically. He still has a lot of room to improve. But sometimes you can't really teach that. Like he has an instinct for just being in the box at the right time.
what do you think of Pepe, Bill?
I mean, he's just pure talent, honestly. It made me kind of sad when he chose to go with the U.S. national team. But I mean, it's whatever he wants to do. If he feels like that's what's best for his career, then
Yeah,
definitely, I definitely want to see him succeed because he's just an icon of Mexican Americans.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm represented by him. So
Right.
I for sure want to see him succeed, and he's really good. So hopefully he goes to Europe in the future.
Yeah.
It gives me goosebumps to talk about him sometimes. There's that piece that it might have been ESPN that did it after kind of the first game where he was talking about kind of waiting in El Paso and picking weeds out of his soccer cleats, and that just reminds me of like the fields we used to play in South St. Louis, and I'm like,
Oh yeah.
that right here.
Yeah. So you can't go much closer between the two nations, USA and Mexico, than El Paso. So you literally was in a tug of war between the two national teams. Uh, me supporting both USA and Mexico, it was a win-win, but is a big boost for the USA, and it really made sense because Pepe is going to be an important player for years, hopefully, for the U.S. men's national team at that number 9 role. Whereas Mexico, they seem to have some other options with Rogelio Funes Mori and Raul Jimenez, so it would have been a tougher path. And regarding Pepe's likelihood to make a big move to Europe, perhaps in January, I think the message is proceed with caution. I would recommend he go to maybe a league such as Eredivisie or Belgium. That would be a nice step up. If he does go to England or Germany or one of those other big leagues, there were some strong links to Wolfsburg, but with the exception of John Brooks, young players haven't really gotten a footing in Wolfsburg.
Yeah, they've kind of wasted some young strikers recently too. That makes me pretty nervous.
Yeah, so I think it's not the end of the world if Pepe stays in FC Dallas for one more season, especially since with the way that MLS calendar is set up, that they're likely with that March to like October run in, they'll probably end the season a little bit earlier to the World Cup. That there won't be that break in between, which can be a double-edged sword. That summer break could be very helpful for you to recover and refresh and rejuvenate, but it could also that extra layoff, it could be an advantage for MLS players.
Yeah, especially for someone as young as him, having
Hmm.
that extra rest could be beneficial. I like the idea of him going to Ajax. Watching Ajax, it feels like they
Yes.
need
For
a player
sure.
like him, and I know
Oh
they've been
yeah.
interested. So that's where I'm fingers crossed.
Right. So that'll be it for that game. It was a solid start against the bottom team in CONCACAF right now, uh, or at that time. Then in the other games that day, Honduras and Costa Rica had a stalemate in San Pedro Sula. Um, El Salvador got a clutch win with Enrico Hernandez, their goal scorer in the FC Eindhoven in the second division of Dutch football there. And that meant that Panama would be coming out with a bit more urgency, as we would find out, against the United States. But before we get into that, our final game for this first of three match days in CONCACAF for October 2021, Mexico versus Canada. Abel, why don't you tell us who the Mexico lineup was?
Sure. And before I go into this is a very Mexico heavy analysis. So if
Yeah.
anyone's out there that like, if I miss something for Canada, that was sort of my intention, but analyzing
I'll
Mexico
do the
here.
Canada lineup after you.
All right. So Mexico started with a 4-3-3,
Mhm.
very experienced lineup, if you want to call it that. He started with Ochoa at goalkeeper. The defense, you had Nestor Araujo, Chapito Montes, Jorge Sanchez, and Jesus Gallardo. On midfield, yeah, Andres Guardado, Edson Alvarez, and HH. The front three was Corona, Jimenez, and Lozano. Probably the strongest front three that you could
For
go with,
sure.
I would say.
Yeah.
It's very dynamic. Corona and Lozano, they're experts on the wing, and Jimenez has an eye for goal.
Yeah. It's a really strong front three for Mexico. That is definitely the strongest part of their roster right now. We'll just take a brief look at Canada because, of course, they're the rising force in CONCACAF. And you have Maxime Crepeau, who has given San Jose Earthquakes a few headaches playing for the Whitecaps in goal. You had Alfonso Davies, Alistair Johnston, Stephen Victoria, and Richie Larea as their defense. Kamal Miller in that holding midfielder spot with Mark Anthony Kaye as well. And in the attack, you had Jonathan Osorio playing that 10 role, Tejan Buchanan and Steven Eusakio on the wings with Jonathan David up top. And you see clubs like Bayern and Lille, and you think, okay, so Canada has some serious players there with Davies and David, but even some of the lesser known players, such as Stephen Eustáquio, who plays in Portugal, he's been very important for them. They've gotten good contributions from Jonathan Osorio, and player who made a move to Europe, but he decided to make a final loan spell with New England Revolution, Tejan Buchanan. He's been one of the most impressive players in CONCACAF recently.
So I'll go ahead with my thoughts for the game. I felt like
Yeah.
Mexico, we started off with a strong lineup. The rest of the team, apart from the attack, included pretty much the same players that we're used to seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me think that Mexico looked very unprepared because Canada set up a good tempo. Like right off the kickoff, you saw Canada's front 4-3 pushing up really, really high. And it looked like Guardado and Herrera, like they couldn't keep up with that.
Right.
So from Canada, I saw a very dynamic formation. They went with a 4-2-3-1, but at times you saw 4-4-2. So they were very well organized. They were passing really well, and I honestly, to be a world class team, they just need the finishing touches.
Mm-hmm.
So like the finishing touches in the final box, set pieces, stuff like that. I think they have a lot of potential. Mexico, on the other hand, they had good explosiveness up top, and that's mainly due to Chucky Lozano with his random burst of insight. We had no midfield whatsoever.
Uh-huh.
Andres Guardado and Herrera were ghosts. I honestly didn't see them. They were nowhere to be seen. Mexico had a lot of chances, but they were unable to break through. It also seemed like Tecatito was missing for a while. I didn't really see much of him until maybe the second half. Jorge Sanchez was the one who stepped up to score the goal. He made a great run.
Yeah, that was an awesome goal.
Yeah, that was a great run.
Yeah.
It shows that he has a lot, like he represents the right backs of this generation. He
Mm-hmm.
knows how to get up. And Chucky Lozano, he was playing really, really well. he gave a great assist.
So ideally, you'd like Jorge Sanchez on the right back and Sepulveda on the left.
I like Jorge Sanchez, even if he's an America player. I think he has a lot of potential. He knows how to get up, and he's really fighting for his spot throughout the whole game. Him and Alphonso Davies were really fun to watch.
Yeah,
They're
that was a key
battling out
matchup there because
yeah.
Alphonso Davies, he's super fast and he's very skilled and technical on the ball as well. He's a complete player, and people forget that Alphonso Davies started as a winger during his time at Vancouver Whitecaps. He arrived at Bayern Munich as a winger, and then because Bayern likes to, shift players around, Philipp Lahm went from right back to center defensive midfielder. Same with Joshua Kimmich. David Alaba went from left back to center back. They found a spot for Alphonso Davies at left back, and he just took off from there. So he can hurt you in a lot of different ways.
And to me, Canada's most dangerous players were Davies and Buchanan. On the wings, they were unstoppable. Davies assisted Osorio's goal, which made it 1-1. The second half was very uneventful. Didn't really take much note of anything.
There was a fight.
There was a fight. There was a fight at the 55th minute. The referee stopped the game at the 59th. I think he probably heard a homophobic chant. I'm still not so sure about the details because even the commentators were like, "What just happened?" I didn't hear anything.
Starting to crack down on that more and more, but still an issue.
But these CONCACAF refs, I mean, what can we even say about them? That's a different story. Mexican fans, I feel like we kind of already touched on that. Regarding the whole Cruz Azul and San Jose issue, I still think the fans at the Azteca are sort of a problem if the referee actually stopped the game for a reason. And this game just left me with one final thought. Let's bring on the next generation. Let's see, all the young players. And we got to see a lot of that in the next games, but we'll get there when we get there.
If you're going to bring in young players, this is pretty much the last chance to do so, this and November, because starting in 2022, you want to play your players for your national team that are ready now. And that's going to be the juggling act that Mexico has to embark. But Justin, big result for Canada, a first point earned in the Estadio Azteca in their history, right?
Yeah, Canada's been that's gonna give some teams some problems, and I think it's almost a wake-up call for Mexico and for the US of if you get to the World Cup, you're gonna play teams that are quick like Canada and athletic like Canada, maybe obviously a little more skilled than they are currently, but they're young, they're going to mature, and I think they're gonna be, they're gonna give Mexico and the US a lot of problems going forward.
Right. So that'll conclude match day 4 for this CONCACAF World Cup qualifying. Great start for the USA, disappointment for Mexico, and then it becomes from good results to meh result from Canada, starting us off for match day 5. They go to Kingston, Jamaica, but Jamaica holds them to a 0-0 draw. And Jamaica, they need points in a hurry. They'll take that one. And then in San Jose, Costa Rica beat El Salvador 2-1 in a come-from-behind win. So you see a lot of these other nations in this qualifying group, they're getting punched in the face one day, but they punch back the next day. And then this is a big banana peel for USA that they got tripped up on here in this 1-0 loss to Panama. And even though Anibal Godoy is one of 3 Quakes players on this Panama roster, it was great to see them again. Former Quakes. It was him, Harold Cummings, and Alberto Quintero. I just wish he didn't play well in this particular game. So
yeah, it's interesting because I never think of this Panama team as being technically good. I watch a lot of them because one of my friends that I went to college with is actually from Panama, so I'm
wow, that's cool.
Relatively familiar with their national team, and they looked like they always look, which is they muddy things through the middle and hope that they can get you on the counter at some point, and they did.
Right, and for USA's lineup, they made 7 changes. Players that stayed in the lineup were Matt Turner, Paul Arriola, Yunus Musa, and Walker Zimmerman. They started in both the Jamaica game in Austin and this road game in Panama. And then they brought in Shaq Moore, Mark McKenzie, George Bello, Kellen Costa, Sebastian Lletget, Gyasi Zardes, and Tim Weah. And yeah, it was clear that this was USA seeming okay with the draw, trying to escape with the draw with this team.
Yeah, I didn't think they were aggressive enough at all. And you look at
Mhm,
that game, I was watching Giassi a lot, not to pinpoint Giassi, but it just
mhm.
really goes to show kind of the mentality of it. He was
Yeah,
very lackadaisical in his press. And I think when the US is good and when they're operating on all cylinders, they're aggressive in their pressing, they're aggressive in those triggers. And there are a lot of times where they're kind of caught between two minds, and Giassi would go to establish the press, he would stop halfway and then go. And then by that point, you're kind of out of position. And then Panama were kind of happy to take advantage of that in certain spaces.
and the goal was coming. Starting from the
Yeah.
14th minute, Gondola had a beautiful cross, and Rolando Blackburn just couldn't connect. And then in the 34th minute, USA gave the ball away cheaply. Gondola forced Turner to make a save, but it was ruled offside. And then Panama eventually scored early in the second half off a set piece. It looked like an Olympico at first, but Godoy got some contact, and he's a strong physical presence in the box there. So eventually, it doesn't matter which team you play against. One thing is in common that teams practice set pieces week in, week out when they practice for the club and for their national team. So you gotta be prepared to deal with those threats. And USA just invited too much pressure.
Yeah, that's what it came down to. It seemed so unnecessary that chance before it, and then you clear it out
Mm-hmm.
for a relatively easy clearance, and then they make you pay on the corner.
Yeah, it's never usually like USA. They do tend to deal with the first wave of the attack pretty well, but then if you get start nibbling a second or third or fourth opportunity, you can usually break free, and then that's where USA they start to have a mountain to climb, and they just couldn't do it this time. 5 shots in this whole game is simply not good enough, and it's just a overall frustrating and discouraging performance. I didn't even bother to think of which player was the best. By default, maybe Walker Zimmerman, but only because he had to put out so many fires there.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not fair to like single anyone out for how bad of a team performance it was.
Right. Yeah. And of course, U.S. men's national team Twitter was on a frenzy after that game. And losing to Panama, it's, for the casual fan, it's like, oh, the sky is falling. And for even those of us who follow this intensely,
Mm.
it's a red flag. But it, all it meant is that, well, maybe we can put a band-aid on this if we can beat Costa Rica, but that's not the mentality you want to have in World Cup qualifying.
Yeah, and I think like this Panama team can hurt you. It's not like a dead in the
Mhm.
water Panama team. It's a pretty
Yeah,
dangerous
they
Panama team.
qualified for the last World Cup.
Yeah, and they scored 4 against Qatar in the Gold Cup. Like they can
Hmm.
score, but it seemed like just our mentality was wrong. And then in the midfield, we weren't connecting from the defense to the midfield to the attack. And that's when Turner started kind of launching those long balls, trying to kind of get something started. And from there, you're just hoping in the wind.
Yeah, and one thing I have noticed with USA and Mexico, it's definitely been pendulum swings.
Mm.
USA
Mhm.
didn't get the result against Panama on this match day, but Mexico had a much more convincing performance against Honduras. So why don't you run us through the lineup changes between the two games of Abel?
For sure. So the lineup, they kept the same formation of 4-3-3. The lineup complete is Ochoa, Rodriguez, Montes, Moreno, and Gallardo in the back line. Herrera, Alvarez, and Sebastian Cordova instead of Andres Guardado. That
Mm-hmm.
was a notable change for me. Yeah, Tecatito, Jimenez, and Lozano. So the
Same
same
front three.
front three. The only changes being that Nestor Araujo and Jorge Sanchez made their way out, and Andres Guardado.
Okay, so less rotation, but some big decisions still.
Yeah, so they didn't completely change the lineup, but the players that he decided to implement instead, I felt like it was a very big decision. Especially Sebastian Cordova, he marked his presence in the 18th minute when he scored that goal. From what I saw, the front line was creating a lot more compared to the Canada game. In the Canada game, the attack wasn't really connecting as much as you would want them to. However, against Honduras, you saw like Chucky and Tecatito, like everyone seemed to be on a similar game plan. there was definitely a lot more attacking chances. However, we must wonder what Mexico could have generated with all 11 players on the Honduran team. I'm not saying it's like an excuse for Honduras' loss either, but with a complete squad, you have to wonder like what can Mexico really do? And Mexico was still dominant with 75% possession of the ball. They had
Wow.
26 shots and 10 on target, which is a lot. I used to be a defender. I was a defender for some time, and I know
Yeah.
how
Bunker
that's
down.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that sounds like your worst nightmare.
yeah, I mean, 10 shots on target too. I mean, you have to like put your body in front of that. So it put Mexico on top, but it brings up identical arguments as the Canada game. The youth deserve a chance. I don't know if you guys have been up to date on my Twitter, but I've been calling for Orbelín Pineda and Charlie Rodriguez for a long time now.
Yeah, I remember
And
you
now,
DMing me about those players.
yeah, I DM you because I was like, man, I want to see these players play. And Orbelín Pineda comes in and he gets an assist against Honduras. And I'm like, see, like what I've been telling you.
I
Orbelín
consider
Pineda,
Pineda a Swiss Army knife for the national team. He can play as a midfielder or higher up the pitch.
for sure. And the question remains though, can Mexico with their current squad compete with the US and their potential World Cup opponents? Personally, I think with the current squad, we're gonna see another round of 16 exit. But what do you guys think? With the current squad, can Mexico compete?
I think we'll get back to that question once we get through the last round of games, but it's
Right?
definitely something to consider. And with USA and Mexico, I feel like their squads are still like there's probably going to be a few surprises even beyond this window. So hopefully there will be good surprises. But Mexico still they got the job done. It helped that Maynard Figueroa, a very experienced player for Honduras, made a very dumb decision and got a red card. But you got to take the points as they come. And Honduras is one of the more familiar Central American opponents. They know how to get under Mexico and USA skin. So beating them is an important job to do. Lastly, we have match day 6 and start things off in Columbus, a spiritual home for the U.S. men's national team. It wasn't 2-0, but 2-1. We'll take it against Costa Rica. And the lineup of Stefan, Dest, both Robinsons, Richards, Musa, Adams, McKinney, Weah, Pepe, and Aronson. It was going to be Areola starting instead of Timothy Weah, but Areola got injured during the warm-up, and it was a good thing it happened that way. Weah would have been most fans' choices to start ahead of Areola, but we'll take it. Hopefully the soccer gods weren't too hard on Areola and he's not out for too long, but still. Much better lineup, more relaxing until the sucker punch opening goal, right, Justin?
Yeah, which like I didn't even see it because I was assuming it was going to be like 6:05. They'd kick off, so I was like still making dinner, and then I hear everything yelling in the living room. And I'm like, oh no, what just happened?
Yeah, so it was a solid cross from Ronald Matarrita, but the finish itself from Keisher Fuller wasn't that impressive. I felt like Zach Steffen, who did get the start, likely because he was playing Columbus, where he played the Columbus Crew for many years. He didn't deal with that. It felt like it was a savable goal, but at the same time, Fuller should have also been marked as well. So I give equal blame to the goalkeeper and the defense of that.
In my mind, it looked like Stefan thought that he was offside, so he wasn't necessarily committing as much as he did. But then Dest was completely off the field, so that kind of negates that.
Oh yeah, so Junior Dest. So the big theme with Dest, he's like Mike D'Antoni's coach teams in the NBA. Half the defense, double the offense. Like, yeah. And I get it, modern fullback and all that, but you still need to do some defense.
I love him, but he just drives me crazy sometimes with that.
This is the cost-benefit situation with Dest coming into fruition with that beautiful upper 90 postage stamp goal to equalize. And it takes something that good to stop a goalkeeper like Keylor Navas. So that was great that we got that equalizer in the first half. It made things much more manageable.
Yeah, he just froze his defender too. It was a very much more of a team goal than we think, because I think it
Right.
was McKennie was
Yes.
making a run that kind of froze the defender, which gave Des the opportunity to like sweep it left a little bit and then go with his weak foot into the top corner. Just fantastic.
Yeah, and there was a bit of a nervous moment there with Chris Richards, someone that fans clamored to see more of in the earlier matches, but he finally got a start. He potentially conceded a penalty-worthy foul, and shortly after that, Taylor Twellman. I mean, you can accuse Taylor Twellman of many things, but not being biased. He was advocating for VAR to be in CONCACAF, even if the play that caused this advocation would have hindered USA in that situation. But did that look like a penalty to you, Justin?
I thought so. Like it didn't look like he got any of the ball and you're in the box,
Yeah,
so like it definitely did. I would have given it if I was the
I think
ref.
I was of two minds. He disrupted the play in a way that I don't think he injured the player, and I
Mm.
think that there was some intent there. But when you look at the fact that he didn't really make any contact with the ball, it could have easily been given a penalty on another night, or if VAR was active. So CONCACAFing works both ways, I guess.
It giveth and it taketh away.
And then during halftime, Keelan Navas had an abductor injury and had to be replaced by Lionel Moret. And this reminded me, I was at the Gold Cup final in 2017 when USA faced Jamaica in the final in Santa Clara. Jamaica had that upset over Mexico. And so Andre Blake, he was starting in goal for Jamaica, but he got injured about 30 minutes in. He had like a broken arm or hand or something, and Dwayne Miller had to come in his place, and that's where USA started scoring their goals. They scored one in the first half, one in the second half, but none on Andre Blake. So you do have that kind of asterisk there that, okay, if Keylor Navas was there, would he have saved the goal that Timothy Weah scored?
And
Because
maybe.
it was ruled an own goal by Morera, even though Weah did a good job to make it happen. But we'll take it. Like, we needed this win badly.
Yeah, I think they were knocking on the door enough to where, and they kind of took their foot off the gas at the end, to where
Right.
you'd maybe think that that second goal comes. But Keylor Navas definitely probably isn't in that position to where it hits off the post and off his back.
So Abel mentioned that Mexico relied on a lot of experienced players. It was as if Costa Rica had 2 or 3 Guardados on the field. They subbed in a few of his age, and Brian Ruiz, he's still a technically gifted player and a player that Costa Rica will still rely on, but he definitely didn't have the pace to make the most of that counterattack opportunity that could have equalized the match.
Yeah, we were in trouble if that was like a Canada, so to speak. Anybody with any sort of quickness, they were done.
Or even if they still had Joel Campbell.
Yeah.
So Matthew Hoppe, he also he made an appearance along with Gianluca Busio late, and Hoppe was so close to making it 3-1. But I hope Hoppe gets more involved in the next window.
Yeah, he looked good, and I think Taylor Twellman did a good job of talking about it on the broadcast, but I do think he gives you kind of different looks that you don't get out of the other forwards, just with kind of he's a little bit unorthodox in how he like moves and how he moves off of people. So
all right, so that's it for that USA game. That wraps up. And overall, like, if you were to grade that window, give it maybe a B- or B, but overall it was a solid point haul, and it keeps them in the World Cup qualifying spots. Looking at the other matches, Canada had a convincing 4-1 win over Panama, with Tejan Buchanan scoring a brace, I believe. And then between Honduras and Jamaica, Jamaica got a road win, a 2-0 win over Honduras at San Pedro Sula. And Jamaica is starting to wake up a bit from the dead, and they're looking solid.
they're also going to get some of their England-based players back for, if not the next window, the window after, which will be amazing for them.
Yeah, Antonio, Bailey, Andre Gray, just a few. They're going to very much improve Jamaica. And lastly, bringing us home is Mexico winning 2-0 in San Salvador. So, Bell, what were your thoughts on this game?
So you see that it's amazing what happens when you listen to your fan base and start the midfields that actually make a difference. So the lineup was Ochoa at goalkeeper. He's like the one player that didn't really move, I guess you could say, across all 3 games. The back line was Dominguez, Araujo, Moreno, and Rodriguez. Araujo, who got a red card, very sloppy challenge. He already had the yellow card. I believe that marked the end for him on the Mexican national team. I just don't see why they should keep bringing him onto the team. Midfield, we had Pineda, Romo, and Rodriguez. So very refreshing midfield, you could say. And on the attack, we had Lozano, Funes Mori, and Alexis Vega. Who
I'm so happy he got a start, Vega.
He got hurt again. So he did not play for the majority of the game. But yeah, so the game from the very beginning was very intense physically. It was a very physically intense game. There was a lot of injuries because of it. I would say it was actually a great atmosphere.
And Mexico had to make 2 injury substitutions.
Yes. So that kind of like gives you an idea of how players were taking on the game. I thought it was a great atmosphere, except for the hooligans and the whistling of the Mexican national anthem. The midfield had a lot of energy. They were passing very well, and they were exploiting weaknesses in El Salvador's own midfield. So they were connecting very well, and they weren't the best goals. It was Hector Moreno header at the 31st minute off a corner, and it was a second goal from Raúl Jiménez late in the game from the penalty spot. But a win is a win. I thought it was very routine, similar to the Honduras game.
Right.
I still thought it was a better game plan than the game against Canada because of the lineup. I mean, there was a lot more to see. So in my opinion, I think Tata Martino can learn a lot from the El Salvador game.
And to our Salvadoran listeners, as there is a Salvadoran community within the Bay Area, this El Salvador team has made significant improvements in the last 10, 20 years or so. They're not going to be a layup. They're going to be just as difficult to beat as anyone else. Can't see them qualifying for this World Cup, but there is some signs of growth in this program. And maybe in another World Cup cycle or two, that it might be the case for El Salvador, especially once the World Cup expands to 48 teams. So we'll keep an eye out there. And for the question that I posed on Twitter during this game, I'm going to pick tacos over pupusas, but pupusas is a very close second.
For sure.
And you're good either way. Really.
Yes, exactly. Can't go wrong. All right. And yeah, it was a frustrating game with the injuries. You never want to see that, especially since I think Mexico in certain areas, like they can't really afford to lose players. So that is a concern. And I think road games are always really tough. In El Salvador, it's tough to rank the Central American atmospheres away from home, but Salvador certainly had an impressive one, as you mentioned. And Salvador is getting some influence from their from MLS and USL clubs, as we see in their lineup. They had Alex Roldan, the brother of Christian Roldan, and both of them were all-stars this season. So I think definitely wants to watch El Salvador, but Mexico ended up getting a strong points haul of 7 points. That minimum expectation met, and that keeps them first in CONCACAF after this window, followed by USA with 11 points, Canada in third with 10, Panama still holding down fourth with 8 points in that limbo of intercontinental playoffs. The rest of the pack did shuffle a bit. Costa Rica has 6 points, Jamaica 5, El Salvador 5, and Honduras 3. So those 4 teams, they're anywhere from 2 to 5 points behind at least an intercontinental playoff spot. So no one's dead and buried just yet, but there is a bit of a divide between Mexico, USA, and Canada and the rest. I think Panama is the closest both in points total and quality to probably make that gap I think that win over the USA could be very important for them. Any other thoughts on the standings, Justin or Abel?
No, I would just say I think, the Ocho is very strong. Anytime, we talk about it all the time about going away in CONCACAF is tough, but I think, going away to any of these teams, they're also talented, more talented than they've ever been to be able to take advantage of an off game.
Yeah.
And for me, if someone were to show me these standings before the qualifying took place, I would believe them. I mean, it looks pretty like standard. We know that Canada is a team on the rise, so seeing them in third place isn't really a surprise. Costa Rica and Panama, probably the closest to qualifying. They've been in the World Cup before. I believe Panama has been in the World Cup, right?
Panama
have, yes.
Yeah, they were
Panama,
in the last one.
Yeah. So, I mean, pretty standard standings in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so too. Canada, they're looking very strong. They have a great chance to make their first World Cup since 1986, and it would be a big boost for them to qualify through this method before a potential automatic berth in 2026. Sure. And now we'll get into some of the other regions of the world. So let's take a look at CONMEBOL. So these standings probably have changed since we started recording, but as it stood when we started, Brazil had 31 points, Argentina in second, 25 points, and then everyone else is pretty close from third to ninth. Ecuador, Colombia, third and fourth. Uruguay in the intercontinental playoff spot with fifth. And then chasing them is Chile in sixth, Bolivia seventh, Paraguay in eighth, 12, and then Peru still, fighting for that spot in ninth. And then the only team that I would be very concerned about is Venezuela. And coincidentally, Venezuela are the only CONMEBOL nation to never be in the World Cup, so they might keep that streak going. Sorry, Venezuelans. But any thoughts on South America, Justin?
I think it's interesting the kind of struggles that Colombia has had. Like that whole everything under Brazil and Argentina being up for grabs. That's more competitive than I've ever remembered it being.
And I like to see Ecuador at third. I think they're really making a statement in these qualifying.
Yeah, Ecuador is a nation. They were in the 2014 World Cup. There was only 4 South American nations that qualified five actually. I forgot about Peru. I'm so sorry. But it was Peru, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, and Uruguay who made it for Russia. So Ecuador would disrupt that status quo a bit. But Chile also, they have some work to do. They were very promising. I think they got some good World Cups out of their golden generation of Alexis Sanchez and Arturo Vidal, Claudio Bravo. And it might still be Arturo Vidal and Sanchez going into potential 2022 World Cup, but it's going to be their last ride for sure. So we'll see if they have enough in the tank to help Chile at least get fifth. But CONMEBOL is one of the toughest regions in the world to qualify, and you got to love their format. It's benefit of being the smallest region, I believe. I think OFC, which is Oceania, might have like a few more, but with 10 nations, it's perfect World Cup qualifying format. Mini league essentially, home and away, every team. It's pretty fair.
It's interesting too because unlike Oceania, every team in CONMEBOL is good. All 10 of those teams are
for sure. Yeah,
they're like the super league, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I think that's why when I look at these South American qualifiers, I hope that we get another experience, even if they make it like once every 10 years or something, that we get another Copa America where the top 6 CONCACAF nations get invited. Because it was great to see those 2 confederations in a bit more of an even playing field duke it out. And seeing USA get some clutch wins against South American opposition, that was fun when they did in 2016. Next, we have UEFA. So let's just briefly go over the UEFA Nations League. So thoughts on Gianluigi Donnarumma getting booed at the San Siro Milan. So he was an AC Milan Youth Academy prospect. He broke into their team. He's super talented. He was their starter for years. And then he leaves to PSG this summer following winning the Euros with Italy, and the Italian Milan fans, they are not going to let him forget. They are very not happy with him, even if he is one of their best players.
All just to back up Keylor Navas too. I mean,
Yeah.
You can't really be mad at him. I mean, he just moved clubs.
Yeah.
I understand their frustration, but like, the man wants to have his career. Let him have his career, you know?
Yeah, like unless PSG is French for Inter Milan, like I think it was a little bit over dramatic, but
For
this
sure.
I think
is
so.
our non-Italian perspectives in Italian soccer. So we're a little bit biased there. Like anyway, Spain got an upset there. They beat Italy in the first semifinal. France took down Belgium in a come from behind win 3-2. And then France ended up beating Spain 2-1 over. They beat Spain with a 2-1 scoreline. But the Mbappe goal was controversial because of the offside nature of the play. Do you think it should have stood?
I mean, I think it's illegal to take away any Mbappe goals, personally.
I mean, if the rule hasn't been changed and that goal was valid because of the rules, I mean, you can't really do much about it.
Yeah.
I do feel like the rule is a little unfair because, I mean, I'm talking now as a defender, but I mean, you can't really do much about it now. I don't really understand the hate that Mbappe is getting because it wasn't his fault. I mean, he was just playing. I mean, yeah, it's pretty unfortunate for Spain.
Yeah, it's been a rough year for Mbappe with the national team. Of course, he had the missing penalty that knocked France out of the Euros, and he's being associated with Neymar and PSG as kind of a diva. Whether or not that's warranted is up for debate still. And even when he scores this winner, like people can't let him have this. And I think I think I would have leaned toward it was offside, but who's to say that France don't win on penalties? It's the UEFA Nations League, so like France, they're still going to be disappointed that they didn't do so on the Euros. Winning the UEFA Nations League might have provided some comfort for Spain, having lost in the semifinals, but overall, it's just a side competition to keep things competitive when they're not in World Cup qualifying. And I'll just briefly go through each group with the relevant teams that are still in contention. So Group A, Serbia and Portugal are the contenders there. Serbia has 17 points. Portugal has 16 points. Portugal has a game in hand. And considering the rest of the group, Luxembourg, Ireland, and Azerbaijan, having an extra game is going to be very valuable for Portugal should they catch in. And Ronaldo likes to stat pad against teams like Luxembourg, so who knows how many more goals he'll score. Group B, Sweden is on top still with 15 points ahead of Spain with 13. So Spain have some work to do. Greece can still qualify for the playoff route in Europe, but they cannot qualify directly. In Group C, you have Italy and Switzerland. They're the two teams fighting for first place at 14 points, with the rest of the group left in the dust. Group D is pretty open, so it's only Kazakhstan out there. France is on top currently with 12 points, Ukraine on 9, Finland on 8, and Bosnia on 7. But Ukraine has played an extra game, so that's going to hurt them. Group B, Belgium 16 points, Czech Republic 11 points, as well as Wales, but Czech Republic have played an extra game, so the Welsh still have hope. Group F, we have one of our first qualifiers here. So congratulations on Denmark to making their 6th ever World Cup, their 2nd in a row, and their 3rd and 4th World Cups. And Scotland is the next best team in that group right now, 17 points. Israel 13, and Austria with 10 points, although Austria needs their UEFA Nations League tournament to go their way. They need to win their lower division UEFA Nations League tournament to have a chance at the playoffs. But Scotland, they qualified for their last World Cup, their first Euros or any international tournament since 1998 this summer. So Scotland still have a chance to make it 2 for 2. Group G, Netherlands, Norway, Turkey, and Montenegro are all still battling it out. Also home to negative 31 goal difference Gibraltar. Thanks for pointing that out, Justin.
Ooh, R.I.P.
Yeah. Group H, we have Russia and Croatia in a similar two-sided battle there. Slovakia and Slovenia were both drawn in that group, presumably to confuse the heck out of people, but they're both eliminated now, so your plan failed. Group I, England with 20 points, but Poland, Albania, and Hungary still in contention. And good old San Marino, so 31 goal difference, but it's a successful World Cup qualifying campaign for them because they scored.
I bet whoever scored that goal is like a national hero, respectfully.
Yeah, if you score a goal for San Marino, you will never have to pay for a meal or alcohol for the rest of your life.
Within that like 2-block radius of San Marino, yeah.
And maybe some neighboring neighborhoods of Italy, because they're an enclave. And then Group G is a very interesting group as well. You have Germany, who have also qualified. They've clinched their ticket. Germany have qualified for all their available World Cups. You know, World War is took them out of a couple. Romania, North Macedonia, Armenia, and Iceland. Any of those teams finishing in second would be an interesting outcome. Abel, you mentioned don't sleep on Romania. What fascinates you about them?
Their youth. I feel like their golden generation is on the come up.
Ooh, that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
And they just have an MLS convert onto their team now too.
Mm-hmm. So looking at these groups, I think Sweden did get one over Spain in a way with getting a draw in the Euros. So it's not as surprising that they're ahead of Spain in their group, but Spain remain an enigma for me because they are starting to replace some of their older players. They have some talented players coming up. Sergio Busquets is now the old guard, which is funny because he's used to Xavi and Iniesta usually being that old guard for him much of his career. But I think it's still a lot of style over substance for them.
It seems like they have kind of that missing generation problem that the US had too, where they have no one necessarily bridging the gap between the Busquets and like Pedri. You know, they like have this middle ground of a lot of players who are really good, but not necessarily up to Spain's standard of where they have been.
Yeah, and I think France is no longer invincible. I remember in the 2018 World Cup, France's squad looked stacked. They had strong players across the board, no weaknesses. But now we're starting to see some chinks in the armor.
For France?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, France isn't really known for having weak squads. Though you can say that the 2010 squad in the World Cup was probably like their worst team ever. But I mean, teams need declines in order to go up, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, and it's not to say that France are going to experience a big decline anytime soon. Although we have seen in recent World Cups that defending champions do tend to go on the group stage the next World Cup, so that could happen to France. But I think since France had a bit of a scare in the Euros, that might scare them straight, and they might be able to break that trend. If not, it's a very interesting trend for the rest of the World Cup.
With France, for me, it's that they'll either implode in the group stage or make to the final. That's kind of like the two dualities of them that I see.
Do we think that the window is still open for Belgium's golden generation?
No. I'm sorry. No.
At least not to win. Like I think make it to the knockout round. But yeah, as much as I love Lukaku, as much as I love that team, it's just not. Yeah, it's just not where it was.
The thing is, the defense. I think they're still relying on the likes of Alderweireld and Vertonghen, and they don't seem to have anyone else to replace them. So they can only take them so far.
35, correct?
Yeah, they're getting up there.
They're getting up there. But I mean, De Bruyne and Lukaku are still like on the top of their game. So if they get hot, I could see them going on a run. But yeah, I don't think they missed their window with the Euros.
It still shouldn't be ranked number one though.
No, absolutely.
They never lived up to that. So
FIFA rankings need an overhaul. And also, I think if Belgium can't even win the UEFA Nations League, I think they're just not meant to be. Is it coming home in 2022? Will they at least get to another final? You think? How good are this England team?
I don't know. Sorry, Val, I talked over you. Go ahead.
I don't see them reaching the final because they're gonna have to play against different styles of soccer. They're probably gonna be facing South American teams, and I don't know if this generation of English players they're really used to all of that. So it's gonna be interesting to see them. But they could make the final. I don't know. They could prove me wrong. Anything can happen, but I don't know.
I think for me, I have an issue with their striker situation. Harry Kane is great, but I don't like him as starting striker for England. And who is their other option there? Jamie Vardy will be 45 years old by then.
And he's retired from the national team. Mikel Antonio went to Jamaica too, so you can't use him.
So that's where I have issues with. Now, the rest, they're a fantastic team.
Danny Ings or Ollie Watkins starter for England.
Danny Ings. Don't sleep on Danny Ings.
He's decent, man.
And then some other final comments from me before we get into our actual qualifiers, the qualified nations. Hopefully, there's some interesting players that are probably not going to qualify directly, but you see Erling Haaland's Norway. Luka Modric is still pulling the strings for Croatia, and Robert Lewandowski is trying to qualify for another World Cup with Poland. It's going to be very interesting. There's a lot of great teams in Europe that we're going to see some of them rise and some of them fall.
I could see Norway making it. They're very fun to watch with.
Yeah, I would love to see them so we can watch Haaland on the World Cup stage.
Yeah, if Norway weren't able to qualify for this World Cup, it would be similar to what we said about those years where Sweden didn't make it with Zlatan. It's oh man, our Scandinavian icon is not at the party.
Yeah, it's also they have a pretty easy group, all things considered. Netherlands are struggling, well, not anymore, but they were struggling for a bit, and that's the big team. They're definitely a better team than Turkey, I would say. Montenegro, Latvia, Gibraltar, that's a pretty easy group to get out of, I think.
Turkey, the alleged dark horses of Euro 2020.
Right. I'm guilty of saying
that. If Norway were to qualify, it'd be their first World Cup since 1998. So they're trying to end a big drought there. Let's congratulate Denmark and Germany a bit. So, like we said, Germany are no strangers to the World Cup. They are as integral to the World Cup as Brazil, in my opinion. And Denmark, it surprised me that they've only qualified for 6 World Cups, but they are one of those European nations that they've been more consistent in the modern era, and they haven't been too much of a factor beyond the 80s. But now, they are a nation that they've won a European competition. They made it to the semifinals this time around. Denmark, I think, is going to be a very popular dark horse pick for the 2022 World Cup.
Yeah, just watching that run they went on at the Euros, and then those young players are going to be another year older. Kasper Schmeichel is still one of the best goalkeepers in the world. I think they'll be just fine.
And I still don't know what to expect from Germany. I think they are scoring a lot of goals, but it's similar to England where, they can run up the score in World Cup qualifiers, but can they do it against legit opponents in the World Cup? I think Thomas Muller is going to be the key to this team. I think he's finding a way to get Timo Werner scoring, Leroy Sané, and Serge Gnabry on the act. He pairs well in midfield with Leon Goretzka, those types of players, and Manuel Neuer is still very consistent. I think poor Marc-Andre ter Stegen, but what can you do?
With Toni Kroos not on the team anymore, I feel the midfield's gonna have to find a way to supply their attack.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things too, where like that midfield will also be another year older, which is both a good and a bad thing because they have like Joshua Kimmich and Leon
Mhm.
Goretzka and Kai Havertz, who and Florian Wirtz as well, who'll be kind of growing into it. But then you also have Thomas Muller, who is going to be another year slower.
Yeah.
Yeah, Florian Wirtz and Jamal Musiala, they're exciting players for me. And if they do make the World Cup squad, they're going to have a good time, I think, depending on how much they play.
Yeah, I Germany is like very interesting to me because of that. And if like those young players pop, then I think they're hard to beat. I still question their like out and out striker. I don't necessarily trust Timo
Timo,
Werner that
yeah.
much, but
Mhm.
Yep. So that's it for Europe. We're going to just skim through the rest of the world here. So in Africa, so the way it works is that right now they're in a group stage. There's 4 teams for each group, 10 groups total. The 10 group winners will advance to their final round of qualifying, where similar to Squid Game, it's a one-on-one showdown with the marbles there.
ooh.
So not exactly like that, but similar format. So right now, as it stands, the following teams are ahead of their groups: Algeria, Tunisia, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Mali, Egypt, South Africa, Senegal, Morocco, and Tanzania. Senegal and Morocco have already clinched. Tanzania's group is the most open. They're level on points with Benin, and DR Congo and Madagascar are not out of reach. Some other close races, you have Algeria ahead of Burkina Faso on goal difference, Cote d'Ivoire 1 point ahead of Cameroon, and South Africa 1 point ahead of Ghana. So it's a really tough format because you have some strong African nations, like they're going to have to knock each other out before the final round. Usually that's not the case. You usually get all the strong teams making it to that final 10, but that won't be the case. Any African nations intrigue you guys?
I mean, like the
Madagascar.
fact that Ivory Coast and Cameroon might both, or one or the other, isn't going to make it into the final lineup is pretty incredible to me.
Yeah, Abel.
If I'm not mistaken, Madagascar was a dark horse in the last African Cup of
Yeah,
Nations.
quarterfinal run there.
So
Nice.
yeah. So you said they're not out of it, so
Yeah,
keep an eye out for them.
they're bottom of that group, but if they win their 2 remaining games and other results go their way, Madagascar could end up pulling the rug underneath all their opponents in that group there with Tanzania, Benin, and Democratic Republic of the Congo. So
Mhm.
Africa has a very tough job qualifying for World Cups because they only get 5 slots for 54 national teams. So
Yeah, that's a crucible.
yeah. As for Asia, so things are a bit more clear cut. So they're down to 12 teams in Asia. They have a Group A with Iran in first, South Korea second, Lebanon third, United Arab Emirates fourth, Iraq fifth, and Syria sixth. Group B with Saudi Arabia in first, Australia second, Oman in third ahead of fourth place Japan. Bobby lives in Japan, so it would be a bummer if they didn't qualify. And
Mhm.
China fifth, Vietnam sixth. So the top 2 of each group, so 4 teams total, will automatically qualify, and each group's third place finisher. So as it stands, it would be Lebanon versus Oman. They would go head to head, home and away, and then that winner would go head to head, home and away in the intercontinental playoffs. So it's literally and figuratively a long road to qualify out of Asia. They travel thousands of miles in some cases. Like you have Oman and Japan in the same group, for example. That's a long trip.
In Australia, that's not
Yeah,
easy.
for sure. I mean, within Australia's domestic league, the A League, you have the distance derby between Perth Glory and Wellington Phoenix, which is a huge away trip in itself. So they're no strangers to being road warriors in the AFC. Any teams stand out for you guys
I gotta say, I'm not entirely familiar with
here?
Iran and Saudi Arabia's teams, but seeing Australia not run away with it, it's always interesting to me. Not Japan not qualifying would that does feel like an earth shatterer.
Yeah, I think Australia, they're still trying to figure out who the next Tim Cahill or the next Mark
Yeah,
Schwarzer is going to be.
they got
Their
to find
golden
that one.
generation have long since gone, but at least within their confederation, they've always been one of like the top 3 teams in Asia. The move from OFC to AFC in 2006 was a brilliant one for Australia to really improve. And even though since then they haven't made out of a group in World in World Cups that they have qualified to, they've been drawn in some pretty difficult ones, like in 2014 with Chile, Spain, and the Netherlands. And even then, like they were up 2-1 against the Netherlands, one of the more interesting group stage games.
Man.
And I used to write for a Australian survivor blog, and I have some friends from down under, so I enjoyed talking to them about soccer and other sports. Like one of them, he sends me rugby highlights as well. So Australia is a really cool country. Their fans are great, and their women's soccer team as well. Nothing has happened with Oceania yet. Qualification hasn't started. They're still trying to figure out how to hand New Zealand the ticket to the intercontinental playoffs, essentially.
That's how
Unless
that works,
we
right?
get another Tahiti situation, I think it's going to be New Zealand again, but it's going to be another situation where the Asian, South American, and North American qualifiers for the intercontinental playoffs are going to be like, please be New Zealand, please be New Zealand, please be New Zealand. Not much to say about New Zealand. They do have some MLS players like Bill Tuiloma and Michael Boxall, but yeah, it's going to be tough for them to qualify regardless of how it shakes up. But my tectonic take question for you both is, who do you think the biggest nation to fail to qualify for the World Cup will be? And who do you think the biggest underdog to actually qualify for the World Cup will be? Who would like to go first?
I think, yeah,
Okay,
I can
Justin.
take it. I can take it first. I'll give Abel a little more time to think about it. I think the biggest nation, as far as like in Europe, I would say I don't think the Czech Republic are going to make it.
Okay.
I think they haven't looked great in their group, and I think there's enough there to where I'm trying to pull up their group here.
They're with Belgium and Wales.
Yeah, and I like that Wales team a lot. So
yeah,
like,
I think
with
Wales
a game
could
in
definitely
hand,
steal second from them.
Yeah, with a game in hand, and that Wales team is very solid. They're another young up and coming team that
I like that pick
outside
for the
of
Czech
Gareth Bale,
Republic
obviously.
because they had good Euros as well. So yeah, it would be a bummer for them to miss out. But yeah, that's one of the tougher groups there because Belgium, obviously, they're likely going to make it, and Wales, they're very solid too. Like outside of England, like Wales is the next best British team. So
Yeah, I like that. Like they play really well together, which I think good for a national team goes a long way as well.
all right, and who do you think the smallest nation is going to make their way to the World Cup?
Ooh, I mean, all right, North Macedonia is a point out. I don't think they're gonna beat over Romania though.
Could we see one of those third place teams from Asia? Maybe they draw New Zealand and we see someone like Oman qualify for the first.
Yeah, I would love to see that. That would be, and I think like with how in flux that region is in general, I could definitely see that.
Yeah, I think Japan, they definitely gotta figure things out.
Japan missing out, that's another huge one for me. I think like I always think of them being there.
Yeah, Japan, they've qualified for the last 6 World Cups, I think. Like they would be a big miss.
Yeah.
I don't think that. I think Japan will probably right the ship. So my big nation that's going to miss out, I think it could be the Ivory Coast missing out of Africa. I think even if they survive their group with Cameroon, there's a good chance they might face another of the heavy hitters like Algeria or something in Africa, and Algeria might qualify at their expense. So
yeah, that's a good shout. I think that like that Africa region is such a hard group to get out of. That, and Ivory Coast has been kind of synonymous with the World Cup too. So,
and in terms of the biggest layoff of the teams likely to qualify, I'm going to give Canada a shout for my underdog pick. I think Canada are headed in the right direction. Yeah, they benefit from playing in CONCACAF, but they were once they haven't even made it to this final round of qualifying in several cycles. They're starting to get their act together. They have some of the best teams. They have some of the best players in CONCACAF, maybe the best individual CONCACAF player right now in Alphonso Davies. So I think Canada is going to finally qualify for this one.
Yeah, that's such a good shout. Like I didn't even think of them as an underdog because like in my head they're already there.
Yeah. How about you, Abel? Who would your picks be?
Probably has to be between Norway and Turkey. They're not like huge nations, but when you think about Turkey and Norway, who's up and coming, you kind of expect these stronger nations to make a bid for the World Cup. But it probably wouldn't be as much of a disappointment if Turkey doesn't make it,
Right.
especially considering their terrible Euro run.
And Turkey have only qualified for one World Cup. Granted, the one World Cup they did qualify for in 2002, they finished third. So it's like the Miami Marlins, like when they make the playoffs, they usually win the World Series, but they don't usually make the playoffs.
But yeah, it would be between Norway and Turkey. In terms of the team, my underdog, it would be Romania.
Okay, yeah, sticking with Romania there. It would be the first time in a while for them as well. Romania, they had a really good team when USA hosted the World Cup in 1994. So we'll see how far this Romanian generation can carry their side. And that'll do it for this special podcast covering the international break. I hope if you haven't started thinking about the World Cup in 2022, that this helps you get hyped for it. World Cups are always one of my favorite sporting events because it just brings the world together. You get to see so many great players from all different parts of the world, and it really is a entertaining competition. You can find me on Twitter at Ivan Ornelas 2. You can follow Tectonic Takes on Twitter as well at Tectonic Takes. Abel and Justin, where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, you can follow me at Justin or at hornekerjustin on Twitter and Instagram. The Soccer Talk Lads podcast, if you just search in Soccer Talk Lads podcast, you'll find us. Our handle is STL_podcast. See, because STL, don't you love that? And that's, yeah. And we also kind of write on our Medium page as well. You can find us everywhere.
All right, cool. Abel is also a Medium writer as well. I will provide his and Justin's Medium links on the podcast description. Abel, what's your social media handles?
It's going to be AAA Media. That's with a capital T, 3 instead of a 3, 3 instead of an E, my bad. Capital A, capital M. It's probably easier to just look at it in the description. And just my name on Instagram is Abel.Anguiano. And also, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll find updates on the new show that's presented by Tectonic Takes off the Richter scale. So definitely keep an eye on that.
All right. You can catch all Tectonic Takes podcasts either on our YouTube channel or on your podcast platform of choice. Consider joining us on Patreon for more special episodes such as this. And also remember that we are part of the Beautiful Game Network. We're sponsored by Roughneck Scarves and Icarus FC, your top choice for a kit supplier. Thank you again for your time, Abel and Justin. Best of luck to St. Louis's MLS club in the future, and go Quakes.
Thank you.